Thank you very much, Jean-Marie, and thank you, Jim, earlier for your words of welcome, and welcome from me too. I'm Tom Lerner, a senior scientist here and head of a new section in the GCI called Contemporary Art Research. For those of you who came here last night, I'd like to welcome you back. The Conservation Matters panel discussion we had, over 500 people attending last night, which, depending on who you talk to, is a record, or at least very close to a record, despite the heavy downpours, and it was a great way to kick off the conference. Before we get started, and I know everybody's very keen to get started, there are just one or two short announcements that I would like to make, some of which do pick up on some aspects that Jean-Marie has already mentioned. First, I would like to add my thanks to everyone at the Getty who's been involved in this project, in addition to the organising committees whose names are listed in the programme. But there really is this amazing support machine that's present here at the Getty. I've never seen anything like it. Things just get done, and it's very easy to forget that there are people making sure that these things get done. So I'm thinking in particular of all the administrative support at the GCI, the GRI, and the museum, the security officers, the preparators, the AV techs. Obviously, the guy in charge of weather has been fired, though. I hope you all have your programme. This is quite an important little document. On the back page is a little map which will tell you where these objects are displayed. It's Gallery E103, the East Pavilion. You need to head back out of the auditorium towards the museum, staying on this level, through the lobby, which is where the map starts, this yellow outline piece up here, through the courtyard, and you'll be bearing a left at some point to the gallery. It's a little bit confusing because you need to enter the gallery from the south side, which means you actually walk past the East Pavilion door and go into the South Pavilion door, immediate left, and you'll find the objects there. It'll become clear, I hope. There are no wall texts in this display gallery. Working backwards, there is a gallery plan telling you what each of the objects are, as well as short descriptions of the objects and why they're here for study. There's some controversial aspects of some of these objects, and it's just important that I mention two things in particular about the Eva Hesse piece that's there. And again, this will make sense once you see this. The first is that the larger piece of the original object is lying horizontal, but it's actually lying face down. So you're looking at the back of that piece. And secondly, the material mock-up that Jean-Marie alluded to is to be viewed just as that. It is not a replica. It's a material mock-up, similar materials that would have been used for the original piece, made December 2007 in Topanga Canyon. The participants in the conference can visit the gallery at any time during the conference, although obviously we hope you'll be here for most of the talks, and we'll be keeping that many to the lunch breaks. We have fairly long lunch breaks. And also the museum is open on both tonight and Saturday till 9 p.m. So the gallery will be open all that time from when the conference finishes at about 5:30 through to 9 o'clock. You do need to have your badge to get access. We ask you very strongly, please, not to try and take photographs. That is not allowed. And also, please do not touch the objects. We negotiated quite strongly with the museum staff that we wouldn't have barriers in place of these very delicate, unprotected surfaces. We tried to make out that this is a professional audience who knew what they should and shouldn't be doing. The security officers were the first to point out that we're actually the worst people. So please don't make us look bad. Your programme also contains speaker bios. We won't be doing lengthy introductions to any of the speakers, but you can find out who everybody is if you don't know them already. It's a fairly well-known group of speakers, actually, but they're all here in your programme too. There are signs outside, but I'd just like to make sure you're all aware that this is being filmed, this whole session, for documentary reasons, education aspect, of course, but also we are hoping to get this onto the web very quickly. We're talking weeks, not months. I don't want to say exactly when we're hoping that's going to be in case we slip slightly, but the idea is to have each of the discussions video streamed onto getty.edu, and obviously once that's available, we'll be emailing you all to tell you that it's now available. But this does mean that, please, if you're asking questions, to wait for the microphone, otherwise we won't hear you at all. And if possible, please remember to identify yourselves when you ask your question. The Modern Paints Uncovered proceedings that Jean-Marie mentioned, we have some advanced copies available outside. The bulk will be coming in just a matter of weeks. Those of you who are authors, I know there are a few of you here, will still be getting your free copies, so I suggest you don't go and buy a copy here. If we run out, or you'd rather just order this book for later, there are also some order forms out there, which gives you a nice 20% discount off the publication, in addition to some other relevant GCI and GRI publications. We don't have any receptions planned, I'm afraid. However, both the cafe and restaurant are open till 8:30, both tonight and tomorrow. Please, will you just have one last check that your cell phones are off, and please try and return promptly after each break so we can keep on track in this program. Okay, I know we're dying to get started. This morning's session, we have 3 really fascinating case studies discussing issues and dilemmas about conservation of works by Piet Mondrian, Roy Lichtenstein, and Sol LeWitt. And this will be rounded off by a panel discussion at the end of the morning on the painted surface. Our first case study will be Mondrian's Victory Boogie Woogie, which was to be moderated by Ron Spronk from Queen's University. Unfortunately, Ron called in yesterday indisposed. So a big thank you to our other 2 remaining speakers who had to make very rapid adjustments to their presentation today. So please will you welcome Nancy Troy, Professor of Art History at the University of Southern California, and IJsbrand Hummelen, Senior Research Conservator at the Netherlands Institute for Cultural Heritage.
We're 10 minutes over time. Can we still have that 10 minutes?
Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to get right to the point. If I see, which I don't. I'm going to speak for everybody here, I think. I'm thrilled to be in this room. There's so much knowledge in here. I wish that it wasn't like a huge party in which I'm only going to be able to speak with some of the guests or something, because I feel like I could learn from everybody in the room. So that having been said, thank you for including me. We are going to, I'm going to present some of the background of the art historical questions about this work by Mondrian, which of course isn't here, and IJsbrand will say a few words about, its location in the Gemeente Museum in The Hague. But his presentation will focus then on current work on the painting. The image on the left of the screen is a classic example of Piet Mondrian's neoplasticism, a style of simple elements whose potential for extraordinary subtle complexity Mondrian explored during the 20 years he lived in Paris and London before coming to New York in October 1940. Shortly after his arrival there, he began an extended process of reworking a number of the paintings he had recently brought to an initial stage of completion while still in Europe. By adding bars of colored rectangles, as in the painting on the right, Place de la Concorde, which he double dated, so there are 2 dates on many of those kinds of pictures. 1938 and 1943 were the dates of the painting on the right. This and 11 other similarly transformed works were recently christened the Transatlantic Paintings by Harry Cooper and Ron Spronk, who together studied their material transformation and historical significance for a groundbreaking exhibition and an accompanying catalog that helped to inspire the project that IJsbrand is going to focus on in a few minutes. 6 months after Mondrian arrived in New York, he met the art critic Charmian van Wiegand, who was probably responsible for introducing him to colored sticky paper tape manufactured by the Denizen Company that Mondrian used in planning the composition of his subsequent paintings, such as New York City on the right. So the picture on the left is an example of several works that were left in the stage of having tape only when he died. Keep in mind that the colored tape that he was using here is different from Scotch tape, presumably manufactured by the 3M company, which Mondrian also used later on Victory Boogie Woogie. for which, he said, he had dreamed a first sketch in 1942. According to Van Wiegand, the composition looked like this at the end of the day on June 13, 1942, when she made this record. Oddly, however, when she annotated her drawing, she inadvertently turned it upside down, which is how it has most often been reproduced and exhibited. Only recently did Joop Joosten realize, so an art historian, realize that Van Wiegand's drawing only becomes intelligible in relation to the further working out of the composition when its orientation is corrected, as I've illustrated here. Although Mondrian worked with tapes while his canvas was upright on an easel, he laid his canvas flat to apply oil paint, as in this photograph taken by Fritz Glarner at the end of 1942 when he's working on Victory Boogie Woogie. According to E.A. Carmian, curator of an exhibition devoted to Mondrian's diamond compositions at the National Gallery in 1979, quote, "What we see here is Mondrian making the last touches to the canvas or posing with an already finished painting. This photograph, then, records the second state of Victory Boogie Woogie, the first having been recorded by Charmian van Wiegand, although less than a quarter of the picture is visible," end quote. Although undated, Van Wiegand's description of further work on the canvas corresponds to what one sees in a photograph probably taken, this is, did I miss something? Yeah, here. This photograph, probably taken in early fall 1943, shortly before Mondrian moved to his last studio in New York. Quote, "He had already begun to break the lines into small squares or mosaics of color and to alter the sizes of the planes," Van Wiegand recalled. The planes, in turn, became liberated of the lines and took on their own rhythm, which appeared in counterpoint to the staccato movement of the lines. In mid to late January 1944, Mondrian again showed his painting to her and to other friends, James Johnson Sweeney and Sidney Janis, all of whom believed that he had considered it to be finished, or very nearly so. However, when Van Wiegand saw the painting on the day Mondrian was taken to the hospital in late January, she realized that a radical change had taken place. Quote, "The picture, which had seemed to me complete, was covered once again with small tapes and looked as though he'd been working on it in fever and with great intensity. The effect of a more dynamic intensity and restlessness was certainly due to the addition of colored tapes and papers, because there were practically no papers on the canvas when I had seen it the time before." Within a few weeks of Mondrian's death, on February 1st, 1944, Fritz Glarner and Harry Holtzman photographed Victory Boogie Woogie, displayed on an easel in Mondrian's studio, this famous photograph. And Glarner made a black and white photograph of the painting. A detail begins to reveal the fragile condition of the painting. And if I had the pointer, which I don't see here, I think you can see here a thumbtack, and so I'm going to come back to that in a second. And maybe, I'm not sure if you can see one in the lower area somewhere here, but I'll have another photograph in a second. So there's another detail. This one of probably the same photograph as it was published in Sidney Janis, a book by Sidney Janis that came out in the end of 1944, where you can see these, I hope you can see them anyway, some of these things that are tacked into the surface of the picture. The corner of a fashion photograph that was published also in June 1944 also points up the problems with the elements on the canvas surface, as I'm sure you can see. By early January 1945, Victory Boogie Woogie had been purchased by Emily Hall Tremaine. So these are just a comparison of those two details, one in the photo by Fritz Glarner and this one in a photograph by a fashion photographer named Fernand Fonsegrive, who had a fashion shoot in Mondrian's studio before that space was dismantled. So already by March 20th, 1945, Emily Tremaine was in search of someone to stabilize the work. Sweeney, curator of MoMA's Memorial Retrospective, where the painting hung at the time, suggested Fritz Glarner, who he believed, quote, knew more about Mondrian's paint and solvents than anyone we could have found in the city. By May 22nd, however, less than 2 weeks after the exhibition closed, conservation had not yet been commenced, but a note from somebody else at MoMA reveals that at some earlier point, the painting had undergone significant alteration. This is Monroe Wheeler. Glarner, he said, had made photographs of the painting, probably referring to this one, before removal of what Wheeler called pins, referring most likely to what we would describe as those thumbtacks. For his part, however, Glarner believed, quote, there is no way in which the painting can be permanently preserved. That is, there is no surface covering which can be put over the painting to keep the pieces of paper from drying out and buckling at the edges. The Scotch tape would undoubtedly have to be changed every 5 years or so. The oil painting color underneath eventually comes through the Scotch tape put over it and changes the colors. There's bound to be some buckling and rolling of the edges, since canvas and paper do not dry in the same way. Some of the pieces were placed incorrectly when the thumbtacks were taken out. But these, Monroe Wheeler writes to the Tremaines, Glarner would be able to straighten out according to his photograph. Several months later, in December 1945, Harry Holtzman was asked by the Tremaines to, quote, make certain corrections in the Scotch tape which somewhere along the line had been misplaced or removed entirely. Holtzman was an artist who was the heir to Mondrian's estate. A year later, when Victory Boogie Woogie was included in the memorial exhibition as it traveled to the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, where you see an installation shot here, the thumbtacks had not been replaced, as this photo of the painting in the exhibition makes clear. On December 17, 1946, the day after the show closed, Stedelijk director Willem Sandberg wrote to the Tremaines asking for permission to have the picture copied. Quote, we've considered the unfinished picture very intensely and have come to the conclusion that its state, namely the pieces of paper pasted on the surface, which might loosen within a certain period of time, justifies by all means the making of an exact and true copy to preserve the present state of this outstanding work of art for the future. The copy would thus be more a document than it would have the pretense of being a work of art, end quote. Sandberg's letter took more than 3 months to catch up to the Tremaines. By the time it did, in April 1947, he had already commissioned Willy Koch to make this copy, which is still in the Stedelijk collection. Although it was supposed to be for study purposes only, in November 1948, as you see from this article in a Dutch newspaper, Koch's work was apparently being featured in place of the original, which had already left the Netherlands by this time, as the Stedelijk's painting of the week. Troubling as it was to the Tremaines, this episode wound up encouraging them to commission their own copy of Victory Boogie Woogie. Having first thought of asking Glarner to undertake it, they eventually commissioned Harry Holtzman, who tried but gave up on the complex project by the end of September 1947. Thereafter, the commission went to an artist named Pearl Fine. It's not entirely clear exactly what kind of copy Tremaine wanted Fine to produce at this point. She explained to Sandberg, quote, who she was offering a version of this copy, so she's writing to explain. It will really be more an interpretation than a copy, as much research must be done to determine just how Mondrian would have completed certain problems. We consider it more like a musician playing a score, which has never been played before, rather than the work of making an exact copy. Ms. Fine is charging $750 for the interpretation and is willing to make a duplicate of this interpretation, presumably for the Stedelijk, for $500. In the end, Pearl Fine produced a trompe-l'oeil copy of the original, in which the tapes and paper, so hers is on the left, and the original is on the right. But you can't really tell very well, because what she made was actually this copy in which The tapes and papers are represented illusionistically and in great detail. Although this copy was originally known and widely exhibited in the late 1940s and early 1950s as, so this is the title, Interpretation of Piet Mondrian's Victory Boogie Woogie, that title was eventually given to another version, which is still in the family of the Tremaines, and that's where I photographed it a couple of years ago. So it's, you know, they both had the same title at different times, so it's a little difficult to tell, well, which one was exhibited and so forth. So she made this, Pearl Fine made this in 1948, a version of what she believed the painting would have looked like if Mondrian had lived to complete it. This she produced together with a series of 12 didactic panels that Tremaine probably intended to publish. Not only did, and these are two examples, not only did Fine's first and perhaps on occasion her second copy stand in for Mondrian's original when the Miller Company, owned by the Tremaines, when their collection traveled throughout the U.S. during the late 1940s and early 1950s. But later, as well, the Tremaines offered the copies and the interpretive diagrams as substitutes for the original canvas, which was too fragile to travel, to museums in The Hague and Santa Barbara, for example. In the meantime, as Burton Tremaine wrote in January 1949, the original picture was deteriorating, much as Glarner had predicted. Quote, "The Scotch tape on the Boogie Woogie is falling off. The real problem, however, is the chemistry of the oil on the canvas as against the glue or plastic holding on the so-called Scotch tape. I understand this is Scotch tape, but I don't actually know this for sure. What we want to do is get a plastic cement that will hold the present Scotch tape to the oil surface of the canvas. We cannot put on new Scotch tape as the colors would be gone because the existing tape has pigment on it." Finally, in spring 1949, the painting was sent for conservation to Sheldon and Caroline Keck, along with Pearl Fine's first copy, which served as the definitive state to which the Kecks referred as they worked on the original. In their final report, the Kecks noted, quote, "Careful comparison with a very exact and excellent copy showed that 3 pieces of tape, herewith included, had been added to the painting. Comparison also showed that 2 of the paper strips had been incorrectly put back by someone who had no recourse to the copy for guidance. On instruction, the 3 additions to the painting were removed. They did not appear on the copy and were no doubt added before the surface was protected by plexiglass, or sometime when the painting was out of its frame." 10 years later, well, in 1959, about 10 years later, after the painting had been damaged while on loan, the Tremaines turned to Pearl Fine to restore it, as well as her own copy. Quote, "It's very fortunate that they are both together," Fine noted at the time, "as I'm guided first by the one and then by the other. In other words, I'm proceeding with the utmost care first to restore the copy. Then, guided by that, I'll be able to place exactly several of the pieces that have fallen off the original painting," end quote. So, I'm very well aware that there are several people in the room who subsequently worked on the painting when it was on loan both to the Museum of Modern Art and or the Guggenheim Museum. And I know that it was also treated, I believe, in the later or in the mid-1990s by Jim Coddington at the Museum of Modern Art. So all of these people are here, and I hope they'll engage in the conversation if I give them enough time. But more recently, it's been submitted to very substantial scrutiny, but as far as I know, at least not yet, any physical intervention after it was acquired by the Dutch state and placed on long-term loan at the Gemeente Museum in The Hague, where it is today. And IJsbrand is going to take over from here.
Well, yeah. I will not give kind of lecture. I will just tell a little bit the story, what happens from the moment the painting came in the Netherlands. And I'll report about a project we are doing now and which is not finished, so I cannot present really the result of it, but I can tell you what we are doing. So the painting was purchased by the Dutch state in 1997, and the purchase was financed by the National Bank of the Netherlands on occasion of the introduction of the euro. And immediately after the purchase, a national debate in the parliament, in the Dutch parliament, on the value of the painting, and in the first place, of course, in the Dutch tradition, on the money value. The price the bank paid was about $40 million. However, the art historical and the cultural value was discussed as well, and it was very obvious that it was not easy for the art historians and also for the conservators, but for the art historians, the curator of the museum, for instance, to communicate the cultural and the art historical value of the painting. So also the opportunity to have the last painting of Mondrian in a collection of the country of his birth was also not very well communicated. There was a political pressure on the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister had to go to the Parliament, and he has really to make an apology on what was called the secret procedures of the purchase. So the painting from that moment on became a political, touchy subject, which is, maybe we will talk about this later, which happened often more in the past in the Netherlands and had serious consequences for some politicians in the Netherlands. So after the painting arrived in the Netherlands, the conservators and the curators of the Netherlands Institute of Cultural Heritage and the Municipal Museum in The Hague, where the painting is on loan, inspected the painting, and we did some analysis, FTIR, gas chromatography, on the tape, and especially the transparent red tape, which is a regenerated cellulose. And on the consolidants applied during all those several conservation treatments Nancy was talking about. The painting was then hanged in a museum, and it attracted a lot of visitors, but it stayed there for 9 years, and although we tried to convince our directors to do research and to tell, let's say, the audience what is the painting, which we actually did not know also, we were actually not, we had difficulties because it was so political, so touchy. But after 9 years, all those politicians left the scene, of course, and after 9 years, finally now we got the full support to do what we then wanted to do. And our question actually was, however, the crucial question was still unanswered. And that was, what is it, what was acquired? And the painting, I'll show you. So this is the painting, how it was hanged after the purchase. And we did those analyses because we wanted to know exactly the conditions of the microclimate in the box that was not harming the tapes. So the painting is not finished. And as Nancy also told, in the 9 days before his death, in just 9 days, he seriously ill. He worked intensively, you can say feverishly, on top of a painted version in the manner he proceeded in this period, sticking and pinning tapes and pieces of paper in areas he wanted to explore or change. So, our question still is, and what was acquired? And I think that is a question as conservators, and what we experience also in the, let's say, last 10 years in our research project we do on conservation. This is a very important question. What is the conservation object? What is it? And that takes a lot of research before you can define your conservation strategies. So, and the effect on the beholder of the painting and the structure of the surface of the Victory Boogie Woogie, I think that is clear, does not correspond then with the effect of the delicate and conscious structured surfaces of Mondrian's finished paintings. Here you have some details. You get an idea of how the painting looks nearby. But that makes the painting also so fascinating. It's open-end in terms of finish. Its open-end has challenged many artists and many scholars to speculate on a finished version. And on top of that, I think in some way the painting is also very photogenic. You don't see those tapes if it's reproduced. So it gives an idea of a certain finishment also. But we knew that the painting is also a black box. And since last year, we have got the full support for trying to unblack box the painting in an interdisciplinary team of art historians, scientists, and conservators. I think in total about 20. Nancy and Ron are also in the team. And we are supported by a team of scientists from the EU ARTEC project with a mobile laboratory. So Mondrian worked about 1.5 years on the painting, and we decided to try to reconstruct the genesis of the painting so that we could relate, and I think that is very important, the very complex layered structure of the painting to significant moments or significant moments or artistic decisions. So the project is still in progress, and we will end in 2009 with an exhibition and a publication. So here we have a real good example of this finished surface. Mondrian, he varnished the black lines, as you see, and that really has an effect on how you see the painting in reality, on how you should look to the painting also. You have some other details of this painting. As Nancy explained already, he put the painting in a horizontal way and then really finished it, painted it. So first, the art historians collected all the material, the text and all the letters by Mondrian from this period, and the text and photographs by all the visitors. So there is the sketch Nancy showed already, made by Charmian von Wiegand in June 1942. And the art historians in the team, they had the task to make a kind of line, a kind of timeline of the genesis of the painting. Actually, what we wanted to make is a kind of film, but the film is not a moving thing, but it's all documents which will be put on a DVD, and we want to also to publish the DVD, if it's possible, with copyrights, to the public. So here you see the photograph of another version Nancy also showed already, and this photograph Nancy just, let's say, discovered a few weeks ago. It was amazing. You can imagine how exciting this is. It's kind of archaeology kind of thing. Here you see all the techniques of the scientific analysis we have used, and the painting has 2 sessions. I will show it. We do it in 2 sessions in the museum. We use till now only non-invasive techniques. And what's very important, the tool is Photoshop, and we are experimenting with GIS, the Geographic Information System. I don't know if you saw the first slide. I will show you some more. You can imagine the painting becomes a kind of site, an archaeological site. And because in between the rectangles you have this what we call already ditches, you know. So it's kind of polder landscape, a Dutch landscape where you have in between. But in those ditches, you can see all the layers. And that, for us as conservators, is a very good technique that we could, with the microscope, we could go into that. Here you see the investigation in the museum. We have 2 sessions. In a few weeks, we have a second session. And here you see, for instance, I am not able to show you the whole Photoshop file, but I made some, let's say, stills from the film. And what we did here is that we could, with the microscope, we could look under the tapes. So we could look to this kind of finished version before Mondrian has put the tapes in those 9 days. And that we could put in Photoshop. So on the right side, you see a reconstruction of the state before Mondrian put the tapes on. So this gives us the possibility also now, with this kind of reconstruction, to really compare different versions and to see what really the changes are. And of course, the questions are then what the artistic motivations are behind that. So this is a detail of this reconstruction. And now I show you some photographs from the Photoshop. Here you see the reverse of the painting, and on the reverse of the painting you see the lines. He worked on it. What is it? 1.5 years, something like that. So he has also to remove paint layers, and he scratched them off, and then the preparation layers were damaged, of course, and because he added new oil paint, that oil penetrated in the canvas. But there you see some traces of the early versions, where he has made the lines. So we can project this kind of early version from the reverse side, to the front side. Of course, we skip this in our Photoshop, but it gives us the possibilities of doing this kind of comparisons. The same we did with Charmion van Wiegand's drawing, and then the art historian Joop Joosten, he once reconstructed, together with this drawing, he reconstructed this state of the painting, and we also use that as one state. And here you see that we project this state of the painting of the photo of 1942 on the painting, and we try to trace all those layers in the painting where they are. Here you see some false color images where we try to identify the layers. So we don't know exactly what the pigments are, but we can identify because some other overlays of the painting just after his death with the pins. And here you see the report or the documents of our microscopical investigations, and this is what we see under the microscope. So maybe I can point. It's very difficult to see on this scale, but this is, here you see one layer of blue, and here there is a second layer of blue, and then here there is a darker blue, which is over some scratches here, and those scratches are in the red. So here you see a red layer, the scratcher, the dark layer, and then a yellow layer going on top of that, and then those blue layers. So and now we could identify, let's say, this set of blue, a darker blue, this more ultramarine blue, and this is more a kind of cobalt blue light. This set of 3 layers, we see them a lot. So we now have a hypothesis that Mondrian had maybe 3 moments where he thought that the painting was finished. He put it down and he had one color of blue and put all the blue there and then dried and so on. Here you see another ditch, yes, a ditch, and another ditch. You see that he also has been cutting some of those rectangles. Here you see we numbered all the rectangles, and we identify in some areas we did now this kind of archaeology, this research, where we try to identify all those layers, and there we use this archaeology documentation, the GIS, the system for, and we will be able to, in a few months, we will be also to visualize that. So then we can, based on our observations of all those layers, we put them in. We put also in the overlapping layers, so this one is always later than that, and so on. And then we can reconstruct all those different phases.
So, for example, can you just go back?
Yeah.
I think it's just amazing that they can tell without really touching the painting that there are 7 on the left. It's yellow, red, blue. Just so that's what those letters stand for. Is that right?
No, it's a left, middle.
So, but hail, road, blau?
Oh yeah. That's the blau. Yes.
And then I think what they were doing was mapping each side with what was in the adjacent rectangle, so that they could try to figure out whether each rectangle had 7 layers or only 3 layers next to it, and what colors were on the same level. So trying to figure out a history of what those layers meant and what was visible on the surface at any given moment.
Right. Yeah. And we will try also to visualize that. I mean, that's our dream, to visualize that in this kind of presentations, so that you really can follow all those different. And I don't know, would you say that the different finished states of the painting? Or
well, I think one of the things that emerges from the history that I was looking at is that there's a lot of different opinion among the people who knew Mondrian about finish. So finish, I guess, as emerged also as an issue last night, is a very important sort of question. And particularly for Mondrian, as prior conservation projects suggested, particularly the transatlantic show, that what Mondrian might have exhibited at any one time, and particularly once he got to New York, he took all the pictures that he had started that were fairly recent from Europe, and he started changing them. So finish for Mondrian was an ongoing process, and some of his friends subsequent to his death also commented that he had to either sell the painting or it had to go somewhere else for him to stop working on it, or for the potential for him to stop working on it, because he constantly said, as he did about Broadway Boogie Woogie, that he was not really satisfied with it. So presumably, if it hadn't been donated to the Museum of Modern Art, it wouldn't look like it does today. I think one of the other things that, for me as an art historian, was so confusing was to read in the letters, the comments about his work, that there was paper, there was tape, there was paper tape, there were pins, and what looked to me like thumbtacks. But so that the kind of nomenclature alone was very confusing. And so just even a description of what was on the painting did not really exist in any place that you could go to really understand what these materials were. Although I believe many people had, kind of written to, as I think Dana Cranmer said, who's here in the audience, she was telling me, well, in the 60s, I guess, she had written to the Denizen Tape Company to ask them, or maybe it was 3M or whatever, for samples of their tapes. So we knew what it was, but it just was very confusing to hear paper, and some people also say cardboard.
Yes.
So, and is there cardboard indeed on the surface?
Well, I would call it cardboard because it's not. It's very stiff, and it's paper kind of material. But what also fascinates me again when I saw the photo when you put our attention to that, because those pins has been removed. They are directly by Holtzman, I think. So would you say, is that a kind of making the painting a museum piece or something like that? Should the pins are it's kind of action, like also a kind of action make the painting in a certain state that it is representable? What do you think?
Well, I think, for example, there are those unfinished tape pictures, several of them, that still have the thumbtacks in them, and they were not exhibited until much later. So presumably these concepts of what was exhibitable and so forth really changed a lot. But I think maybe we should see if there can be a few minutes of questions from the audience. And we wanted to, I think the first one is coming from Yves Lambois, so that the expert asks the ingenieuse.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, I must say. Totally fascinating presentation, and I can't wait for your CD with all the different states. One question I think is something which was just in relation to what just mentioned by Nancy. There's this famous dialogue between Mondrian and a friend of his at the end of his life, who was very puzzled by the fact that he kept changing Victor Boogie Woogie. I think it was Victor Boogie Woogie. And I told him, well, don't you? There must be like 10 paintings in there. Why don't you just, go to the next one? And Mondrian replied, I'm not really interested in making paintings. I'm interested in finding out ideas. So, what I found very interesting in your research is that you will be able to identify somewhat precisely states.
Well, we hope so.
You already are doing that. So when you compare the states, and which differences are often not enormous. I mean, it's not an enormous range of difference. Are you able to flesh out the different ideas? And I'm asking in one particular case, which has always interested me very much, is those very big white rectangles in the center area of Victor Boogie Woogie, which, because of the fragmentation of the lines around it, look like they are on top of the color visually. They look on top because at the corners the little squares don't match the corner in the latest version. And I had a feeling that it was actually more matching in the earlier version, so that's a very here to change of ideas. You would have to have go. You'd have to have one of the.
Sorry.
Here. I don't have a pointer, but you see in the digital image, you can see it. Let's say, don't go down, Nancy. Go to your pointer down here. Yeah, this corner here, for example, just here. Hello. Where you were? No. You on this white thing, the lower corner of this white rectangle, the lower left corner. Okay. Here you can see, or just around all those various corners of this big rectangle. I have the feeling that in the earlier version, in the digital image, the corners match between the.
Yes.
There's a match of the vertical and horizontal limits of the white and that of the articulation of the lines.
Yeah.
While I have the feeling that it's changed in the later. See here, for example, it doesn't match anymore, and I think it's very important because it reinforces visually this impression that they are not on the same plane.
Yeah.
So it's a different idea, actually.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there are more things which puzzled me is for also the different blues. There are so small differences of the blues, or on top of each other. The same goes for the red, and also the gloss. You see a little change of glossiness, for instance. It's a different paint. So, what does that? What have effects on the beholder? That's a kind of fascinating. I think also fascinating subject to search on.
So we maybe have time for a minute or two of other questions.
Yeah, could we take maybe one more question?
Sorry, we took much longer than we were supposed to, but it's hard
There's
to
one
do.
down here.
Is there another question?
just down in the front here. We have to take this one because it's my boss.
Giacomo Chiari, GCI. I have a question and a suggestion. The suggestion is, it seems to me that the texture of this painting is fundamental. And by only taking a picture, you may lose the possibility of later on looking at different ways at the paint. The suggestion is there is a technique, it's called PTM, you may have known, that allows you to move the mouse and change the angle of the light. That would be great for your system.
Thank you very much for making this suggestion.
The question is, if you go back 2 images here, how did you like the experience of having the scientists working with the public?
How did you like it? What was the impact of that?
It was very distracting. Because we want to concentrate, of course, and there were also moments, it was of course agreed with the press also, that we were interviewed, and that was very busy, so that was very distracting. But in general, I think the questions, so the public also, they put the question on papers, and they were all very interesting, and we got a lot of press attention. So that was, I think, also very good, because that gave us the possibility to really tell something about this painting. So in general, it was very good. It's also complicated because we had to make the museum very dark for the UV and so on. It was technically, it's difficult. And thank you for this suggestion. We did actually try to do it, and maybe we'll do it in the National Gallery in London. They have this kind of couple, of Hewlett Packard's, and we do consider it, and we are really keen on better, and maybe in general, I think this is very important for the research also of this kind of paintings, and probably other paintings which we will discuss later on the surfaces, is that we develop this kind of techniques, to capture the surface qualities, which are now not very well used anyhow in conservation.
I think the one thing I think is fascinating is the sort of umbrella of, in Holland, the state and the pressures on the museum and on others. On the one hand, to control what might be learned about a painting that cost so much taxpayer money and should definitely come out as a Mondrian, as distinct from a disconnected Mondrian that was put together by somebody else. And also, I think you're hinting at the fact that by making it more public, there could be more public understanding, so that these things are there's so many different pressures that are so different from, let's say, the ivory tower, if that's what it is, of a conservation studio or an art history classroom or book or whatever. And the implications of that, I think, are very important and probably not unique to this situation, although actually doing conservation work in a public environment like that is probably, I don't know, but, pretty rare.
I think.
But I hope we can come back to that, because I think it's really interesting.
Yeah. Yes, we do have to stop now. We've overshot a little bit, and there'll be plenty of time, as IJsbrand said, to discuss some of these aspects about the surface in much greater detail at the panel discussion. So we have a half-hour break for coffee now. We'll be back at, in fact, 10:40. And please thanks Nancy and IJsbrand one more time.